2005's Resident Evil 4 is considered by a lot of people out there to be a cult classic. Even nearly 20 years later, this one is still fun to go back and replay because let's face it, this game, it really defined the series at the time. Even looking at it all these years later, it still holds up pretty well in my opinion. I recently went back and replayed several hours of this over the last couple of weeks. And I have to say this one is one of the best in the franchise. Only because Capcom knew at the time they had to change up the formula. Otherwise, this game wouldn't have been as iconic as it ended up being. So taking place 6 years later after the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. Leon S. Kennedy travels to Europe to rescue the president's daughter, who has been kidnapped by a religious cult called the Los Illuminados. And these people uses a parasite called the Las Plagas in order to control a small village. And soon Leon realizes he has to fight his way through another nightmare. Man, this one takes me back. There is so many great things about this video game. The characters, the voice acting, the story, the music, the numerous action sequences, and of course, the enemies. And speaking of which, there is one group of enemies in this game that are truly terrifying, and that is the Regenerators. Yeah, scary foes indeed, especially with the music and the heavy breathing. This game does a great job of balancing not only just survival horror, but action as well. Main protagonist Leon Kennedy has came a long way since Resident Evil 2. Back then, he was just a rookie cop who found himself in a terrible situation. He didn't have any experience, but in this game, he actually can fight pretty well. And he is determined to get the president's daughter actually back under any means necessary, which makes him a badass even with all of the enemies he comes across within this game. Which actually is some great character development considering how far he's come since Resident Evil 2. Nonetheless though, this one definitely won so many Game of the Year awards. It's considered one of the best video games of all time. Plus, it led this franchise into a completely different direction, which actually had helped it from becoming boring and from being repetitive, considering that this video game series needed a major shakeup to say the least. Now, it is interesting that originally this video game could have been something completely different. There are 3 other versions of this video game, such as the Fog version, which, interesting enough, it took place in a castle and Leon's going to fight some enemies, such as zombies. But you know, the director of this project, he said no and decided that wasn't the right direction to take this franchise. Then there's the Hookman version, where Leon would have fought some paranormal enemies, like ghosts and all that. And once again, that wasn't the right decision either. There is another version I don't know much about it, which is called the Hallucination version. I don't know what it was going to entail per se, but I know maybe it would have been similar to the Hookman version. But, you know, I'm glad that this game finally did sell on the version it ended up being, because let's face it, zombies, yeah, there was a staple of this franchise up to this point, but it had to be changed up. A lot of people gave this game a negative rating because there weren't any zombies. Like what? Sometimes you gotta reinvent your franchise, otherwise it gets stale and boring. Like, imagine if Metal Gear stayed the same and never evolved, then, well, it will end up being stale and boring, like I mentioned before. Leon S. Kennedy, definitely a cool character here. he has improved. He has a lot of fighting experience. He's trying to find the president's daughter. And speaking of which, I did not like Ashley whatsoever. Every time you have to look after her, it drags the game down to a crawl. And, well, she's annoying. I don't like that character, but I get why she's here because the developers need a mechanic in order to make the story work. It was great seeing Ala Wong once again. This time she's working for Albert Wesker. And speaking of which, how come Wesker is not in this game all that much? I guess he's not supposed to be the main villain considering he would show up as the main antagonist in number 5. But I still would like to see his involvement a little bit more. But anyway, Ala Wong, actually, she helps Leon out a couple of times throughout the story. And she would even get her own story herself in the other re-releases of this game. And definitely some interesting things I want to point out is that the franchise, yes, it changed up the formula. But some stuff such as the fixed camera angles, I'm glad they got rid of that. And definitely having some improved gameplay mechanics was long overdue because Resident Evil Code Veronica actually was very dated, even when that had came out back in the early 2000s. Louis, cool character. I was kind of ashamed when he was killed by Osman Sadler. I get it, story reasons. But my goodness, they really couldn't have more Louis in this game, such as playable sections. You know, like when Leon and Louis is fighting the villagers in the cabinet. But anyway though, this game's legacy speaks for itself. It's gotten a remake which came out last year. And not only that though, but other characters that stood out is Chief Mendez, who I thought was quite menacing. A character I hated though was Ramon Salazar. He comes off as a prick, and I guess that's what the developers was going for. And then there's the final boss, Osman Sadler. I'm like, alright, this is some good list of baddies here because the franchise, to be honest, it kind of went downhill a little bit after this installment. Maybe because this went action fest. But say what you will, it's not as action heavy compared to Resident Evil 5. This is still one of the best video games of all time. And somehow you haven't played this classic, definitely check it out because it is well worth the time. I'm giving this video game a 9 out of 10. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say about this. Definitely iconic. I've spoken to so many people over the years about this game. They say that it's one of their favorites from the franchise. Even though some of the gameplay mechanics are outdated by today's standards, it is still very playable and more importantly, an entertaining video game series that's been around for nearly 30 years now. And that's my review of Resident Evil 4. Alright, leave your comments down below in the section and let me know what you think about this video game. My review of Resident Evil 5 will be happening sometime in the future, so be on the lookout for that. Okay, this is Slum Guy 172 saying peace out.